Tonight I've been cleaning up some of the handbrake mechanism and the brake compensator part that goes in the middle of the car that the cables wrap around. Um, Hopefully you can hear me. It's kind of rainy outside at the moment. The brake parts, I've stripped it all down, cleaned it up. This is the little mechanism for the handbrake. There's a thread in the end here and a rod goes down to the back of the car, and inside there was a little brass bush which is pretty worn out, so I machined up a new one on the lathe. The rest of the parts have just been cleaned up. Some of them have been painted already. These are for the foot brake. This is all the handbrake mechanism. I did find that this part here, which kind of bolts onto the side of this part here, it goes in there. I thought the two of these I had were the same, but they turn out to be slightly different. This one has threaded holes, and this one here gets used with a longer crosspiece and these little spacers. So it ends up shifting the brake mechanism that direction in the car. So I'm not sure exactly what car that would be off. The other one I have is over here. It's been painted, and these just have clear holes, and they use a shorter steel bar through the middle. These are just bits of the handbrake mechanism, and this is the rod that, or rather I don't know what you would call it, I guess it's a shaft that sits down here, and that's what this rod operates on. You can see that goes down to the bottom of the brake pedal down there, and we're going to have to make a hole in the chassis at some point for this to go through, but that's what gets the brake motion from the pedal back to that shaft which goes through the middle there. The other thing I was looking at was just cleaning all of this up, but eventually this is going to have to be shortened because there's no way a handbrake lever that tall is going to fit into the under the scuttle of a Brooklands, which is a very low car. So I'm going to have to look at that, but I probably can't do that until I've actually built the body and I know how tall this needs to be, unless somebody's got a measurement that I can use, and then I'm assuming I can sort of cut this down and re-weld it in the middle. I think that's about it for this update. I haven't really been doing too much this evening, but I'll add more as I do more. One thing I did find that I can add is one of these that I had was actually assembled incorrectly. They had a grease nipple in here. That grease nipple won't do anything at all because the shaft doesn't turn. These little brass pulleys run on a little stainless steel, it looks like stainless steel collar inside there. So you don't need to lubricate inside there. There's actually a piece that I'm missing. There's meant to be a clamp that fits on here that you tighten up. This is the part here, number 19, cable clamp. And apparently what you do is when the brakes are in the car and you've got the cable and everything on, you're supposed to tighten that up against the cable and then loosen it off a fraction of a turn or something like that. I was reading in one of the old bulletins, I think, where they mentioned one of the old tricks was just to do that up hard, do that up tight, really clamp the cable, which would increase the braking force or something like that. I won't really understand that until I've got this all assembled and put it together, I guess. I guess I need to figure out where I can get hold of one of those pieces from, which again might be tricky because that's going to be a cast piece. Pretty sure I don't have it in all the boxes of bits, but I'll have to have another rummage through. More little jobs on this Riley. These are the plates that go underneath the springs that clamp the rear springs to the trunnion blocks, and I'm modeled these up in Fusion 360. That was a test cut I did on my little laser cutter just to make sure I had the correct shape. And then I went up the road to one of the local metalwork places and they cut them out of some 8mm steel for me on their plasma cutter, CNC plasma. And you can see that does a pretty nice job. The only thing I need to do on them is drill out the holes, because the plasma cuts, the curve of the cut is actually tapered. So might be a bit hard to see, but those holes are tapered, so I need to drill those out to the final size, which should be pretty straightforward. They will fit on top of the springs like that, and then I can bolt all of that up together. I have to think where I'm up to now, because it's been a while since I did the last film, and I do little bits and pieces here and there and forget what I've already talked about. The most important thing was Joss came down to visit, which was good. He finally got to see my little Austin, which is just about ready to go on the road, and got to see the progress on the Riley. And Joss had a few comments, of course, because he always does, but they're all good comments. And the first one was something that he had told me not to do, that I went ahead and did, and I should have listened to in the first place, which was shortening the steering column. So I'd ended up shortening this, I think it was about 100 millimeters, 4 inches. And that was meant to be so that it was easier to get in and out of the car, because it is a bit awkward. But Joss kept saying, don't do that, don't do that. And I did it anyway. And then when he came down to visit, he showed me exactly why I shouldn't have done that. And the answer has been sitting here on my wall the whole time. And I really should have known this. But it's difficult for me because I've never seen one of these cars really all together. I've seen one replica, and that was a few years ago. And actually, I've got a funny story about that in a few minutes. But Joss has a lot more experience with these, so I should really listen to what he says. But for me, it's tricky because I'm just going by photos and trying to figure it out as I go along. But the really obvious sign that I shouldn't have shortened the steering column is the door. So this door is one of the real original Riley Brooklands pieces that I have. So this door was off the original Brooklands that this car chassis is a copy of. And it was actually a car that won one of the first Grand Prix races, or one of the first motor type races in New Zealand. The Prosperity Grand Prix, I think they called it. It was done up in Auckland. It was won by a guy called Dexter, driving the original off this car, which is what this photo album's full of pictures of. And this is the door off that car. They didn't use it when they did the restoration on that. So this is a proper, 1930 door skin. And this, you can see, this is the driver's door. The passenger door is actually a different shape. This lines up pretty much with that back row of rivets. So the door fits pretty much there. It's actually up a little bit because there's timber framing that goes underneath the door on top of the chassis. But if you imagine the door's there, you can see if the steering wheel's shorter, it hits the door. So that's why you need the extra length. So what I'm going to do, or what we did, is luckily I had a second steering column. It was actually bent, so I made Joss straighten it for me, which he did, of course. And I put the second steering column into my already restored steering box, which was good because that was actually leaking, just one of those really annoying tiny little drips. But I was able to make sure I put enough gasket goop on it. There's no paper gasket in here. I just used some Loctite 515 inside there and just made sure I went around the bolt holes this time. And that stopped that leaking. But I am going to have to get new tubes to make up the controls down the middle. I was probably going to have to do that for the inner tube anyway, because the inner tube originally had wire running down it for the horn button, and that's impossible to get out of there. I tried extracting it and soaking it and all sorts of things, but as soon as you pulled on the wire, everything was so old and brittle, it snapped. and the rest of the wires are still down inside that column. So I've ordered a piece of steel for the outer column. I think that's 12mm steel, and I believe I need 5/16 for the inner piece, although I could probably make it work with a piece of 8mm steel. So that's on the way. The one problem we've got is the end of the steering shaft has been hammered in the past. It might be hard to see, but you can see it's a little bit distorted. And Joss spent a long time trying to clean up the thread. We used thread files and needle files and things just to try and get this thread cleaned up a little bit, but the nut still binds going on there. So I've actually ordered a suitable die to clean that up. I had to get that from the UK. It's actually it's a special thread. It's not one of the standard Whitworth ones. It's a standard pitch, but not a standard common size. So that should be on the way as well. And then all I need to do is clean up this thread. I've already sort of lapped the taper onto here, so the steering wheel fits on nicely. It just needs the nut doing up tightly, and that should all be good. This gives you some idea of how little room there is in this car. So the seat back is basically here, and you sit pretty much straight up and down. So this steering wheel is right in your face. Your arms are bent to hold it. But as Joss says, that's the proper vintage way. So that's what we're going for. Now this door, you can see it's all rusty at the bottom. This could be repaired eventually, but the other bit of advice from Joss was don't do anything with this door yet, because it tells you so much about the shape of the car and the shape of the body. So you've got all the dimensions on there. You can see how much crown there is in it. There's quite a bit of shape in it. And you can see how it's all been constructed. So with the flanges at the top, these are just hammered over. You can see the little holes where it was all pinned. This is folded over and pinned. This bottom edge is folded over, and on the door skin, which is all made out of timber, there's a wooden plate, a metal plate, sorry. So if you imagine the piece of wood in there, let's see, something like this, and you've got the skin on the bottom of the frame. Apparently there's a metal strip that gets screwed to the wood, and it overhangs, and that overhang is what this bottom piece of the door and this back edge fits into. It's interesting there, you can see a little bit of green paint underneath the red paint, sort of turquoisey green, which is interesting. Actually those colours are pretty much the same as the colours they use on Mammoth steam engines. But with this, the problem is if you cut this out now to try and repair it, you could lose the shape. So I think what I'm going to do is use this as some practice off my metalworking skills, because I definitely need practice on the English wheel. So because I've got this and it's all in one piece and it's not a huge piece, I think at some point, maybe over the Christmas holidays or after Christmas, I'm starting a new job at the beginning of the year, so I've got a bit of a break. Maybe I'll spend some time trying to replicate this panel, because that gives me a lot of the shape of the car. So that's something to do. The brake mechanism I have reassembled. In here I machined up these little brass spacers that go in there, and I have looked at, I need to machine up the nuts that go in here, and to do that I was going to use the offcuts from the shock mounts, which is up here. It's just hex steel bar, but since they're using that for the shackle pins, I know that's going to be good strong steel, so I can chop one of these up and use that to make the nuts that go in the middle of the brake mechanism. But one of the things we were looking at is how the brake mechanism on the real Brooklyns is done differently. So with Riley 9s, there's different marks of car, and it looks like the Mark 1 to Mark 3s, which are the earlier ones, used a different style braking mechanism where there's this crossbar here, and that gets bolted onto the cross member here. There's a different handbrake mechanism that attaches to the ball on the back of the gearbox. This is the early handbrake, and the handbrake and the foot brake. The front brakes are operated by cables that come through that hole and up to the pulleys on the front axle. The rear brake is operated by a rod, and we have the rear brake mechanism all in here, just loosely assembled. I haven't cleaned all these pieces up yet, but I'm trying to figure out exactly how that works, because according to the parts book, the Mark 1 rear brake setup is different. So this is the Mark 4 rear brake parts. And what I'm trying to find out is if any of the original Brooklyns, because the pictures we've got of the original one have this style at the back. So are all the original Brooklyns like that? And the other thing I've been trying to figure out is, did they make any Brooklyns with this style of handbrake? And it's all a bit hard to find out, because they only made 100, 120 original Riley Brooklyns. I believe there are 30 or 40 originals left. They were made between 1928 to 1932, and the Mark IV style brake mechanism, which is what this is, came out in 1930, so halfway through the Brooklyns production. And looking about online, trying to find pictures of original cars, I'm sure I have seen a picture of a supposedly original Riley Brooklyns that's got this style of handbrake in it. But the problem is, these cars are now, 90 years old, and they've been restored and modified and changed over the years. So it's really hard to know what was actually original or not. So I'm trying to figure that out. If I want to go for the really early style setup, the Mark 1 to 3, I either have to find those parts. So I need to find all of this brake mechanism stuff in here and the handbrake, or else I need to make it. And there isn't anything that's difficult to make here. It's all relatively straightforward metalwork. The problem is I need accurate drawings of all this stuff. I need decent measurements, good measurements of it all, because being brake mechanism type thing, I suspect if you're 1/4 of an inch off on one of these lengths of one of these levers, you're going to mess up the way the car brakes. Because when you look at these mechanisms, there's not a lot of adjustment in them. You could be, if a component's off by 1/4 of an inch, it can completely ruin the braking. So I'm still figuring out what to do there. At the moment, with this Mark IV setup, I have 95% of the parts I need, probably more. All I'm missing on this now is, come around this side, the handbrake pawl, which goes on here, which is just a tooth lever for the handbrake. So worst comes to the worst, I could always make something for that. I need the rod that goes back from this, which is the handbrake mechanism, down to the back of the car, and I need the clamp that goes in there. If we look from the other side, the clamp basically goes up on here, and I think what it's originally designed to do is just to stop the brake cables bouncing off the pulleys. So the way the cable works is it comes from the back of the car, over this one, down around that one, through the front cross member around another pulley which goes down here, which I do have. I've got the mounting for that up to the front of the car. But I think I mentioned in the other film what I've read has been suggested in the past, I don't know if this is still valid information, is you would set up the brakes, set up the compensation, and then you'd do this clamp up hard, which would effectively stop it moving around the pulleys, I guess. Or it would still move, but apparently that biased the brakes a bit more towards the front and would improve the braking performance. I don't know if people still do that or not. So I've posted a question to the forum about the brake setup on these Rileys and what's original and what isn't, but I haven't had any replies just yet. So that's where the Riley's at. I had good news today. Well, I'm assuming it's good news. I got the bill for the engine work. So that's the fitting of the new white metal bearings for the new crankshaft, having that line board, and having the flywheel taper machine to fit the bigger crank. So I'm assuming that means that's all good to go and pick up at some point. And supposedly the tyres should have been arriving yesterday, I believe, down in Christchurch. So I need to talk to the wheel guy and see if those have arrived and if they're going to be likely to be turning up soon. So I need to clean up the rear brake bits, start cleaning up the rear axle. I can start looking at the differential. I still need to do the rear pins down here. That's just machining those up, and start thinking about the front pins. I did fit the plates on the bottom of the springs. These probably shouldn't really be these castle nuts, but that's all that I had at the moment to bolt those on there. So I need to figure out the right nuts to use on there. I did have to order a die and a die handle. Those are up here just to clean up the end of the thread. And I ordered the die, and it's a bigger size than most of the rest of them I had, so I had to buy another handle. And then of course realized that the handle wasn't going to do me much good because there are U-bolts, which mean they all stick up, so you can't turn the die handle anyway. So I just had to grip that in my little plier things. I can't remember what they're called. So that's where the Riley's at. Probably go and have a look at the Austin next. And the Austin 7 is now complete enough that I should be able to get it registered. It's not done. In software we have this concept of the definition of done. It's not 100% done, but it's good enough to ship. So what I've been doing is I bolted the front guards back on, and I ended up spraying the underside of everything black. It's a bit hard to see, just with my cheap as anything black spray paint, because it comes off really easily. A little bit of solvent, it just wipes straight off. But I wanted to see what it's going to look like. And these guards are okay, the front ones, but I know I can do better, and I would actually like to rebuild them at some point. But for the car to be legal and on the road, it doesn't have to be pretty. The whole rat rod culture shows that. So these are functional enough, and they look fine for me to be able to get the car registered, get the papers I need for it, and then just drive it around, because I need to drive it around to break it in properly. So basically I've just been working towards that. So the guards are all on now, the lights, the lighting brackets, all of that's done. The bonnet I am probably still going to remake, but if I run out of time to do that, this bonnet that I've got on here will work perfectly. The only thing wrong with this is this line here, hinge line, is in the wrong place and it's at an angle. So it needs to be higher up and straighter, so that this panel is a rectangle. The one I've got on here works okay, it just looks a bit funny. I've added the straps for the bonnet. These are really more just a safety measure. and a bit of that vintage look type thing, because the bonnet does have these spring catches which hold it down pretty well. With the straps and the spring catches, the bonnet can't go anywhere. So for the straps, I've got these, I think they're called footman's loops or coachman loops, and these leather belts are something I got, I think, on eBay, and supposedly they're World War II vintage Vickers machine gun kit strapping. So I'd bought 4 of those, which was lucky because I needed to use all 4. They were the longest belts I could find, and they still weren't long enough to go completely over the car and give me enough to loop back. So often with these sort of straps, you see them with some sort of springing arrangement in them, because of course the leather's going to stretch over time. It stretches and shrinks and does all sorts of things. But I decided on mine, because these aren't actually what's holding the bonnet fully down, I didn't need those. And I've just done it in such a way that I can adjust them later if I need to. So it actually worked out quite well that the straps weren't quite long enough. So I cut the buckles off and attached them to this side. The buckles are on this side of the car because this is the near side. So if you break down and you're at the side of the road, this is the footpath side. So you want all your buckles on this side. I was looking at where I would put them. On Austin 7 Ulsters, the bottom panels of the bonnets are fixed, I believe, and just this top part opens. So they actually end up putting these buckles up here. But I didn't really like how that looked on mine. I just wanted to keep the top of it clean, so I just put them down the side. On the other side, this is where I had a bit of a problem because the straps weren't long enough. So I had to cut up one of the other straps, and I made these sort of loop pieces. So it's actually 3 bits of leather thick here. I am still waiting for the correct Chicago post to come to bolt these up. These are just temporary screws through there. But because I've done it like this, if I need to shorten the strap in the future, I can just make new holes in this one and move it down inside here. And it'll all be neat and tidy because you won't see those holes because it's hidden by the 2 other pieces of leather there. I haven't actually, I've made these little clips, but I haven't screwed them through the bonnet yet because I may be doing that on a different bonnet. But they're just there to hold the belt in place and stop it rubbing around, apparently. It's interesting, you hear a lot of people talking about bonnet straps on various cars, Morgans and things like that, and they're worried about them scratching the paint. Whereas on this, I don't care. If the paint gets scratched, then that's fine. It's a car. That's going to happen. It's not a show car. It's not going to stay perfect. I am actually thinking I quite like just the look of this satiny black finish for the guards and the aluminium body. I may end up just not painting it. I'll just leave it like this. I'm not going to polish it. I might scuff it back, sand it back a bit to make it a little bit cleaner, and then rub it with a Scotch-Brite pad. But I'm not too worried. I just want a car I can drive. I've also added the welting between the panels, and I did a similar sort of strap for the boot lid there. So it's all worked out fairly well. I think I will rebuild the front guards though at some point in the future. I want to make them slightly fatter, slightly wider, and instead of them being in 2 pieces bolted together in here, which is why there's a row of bolts in here, which you can't really see now that I've painted everything satin black. You can see the screw heads. That will all just be 1 piece. And now that I've made them like this, these are my prototypes, I've got a much better idea of what the new ones need to be and how to make them a lot neater. The other thing I'll do is, because I was playing around with the shape, I haven't got the peak of the guard exactly right over the arch of the wheel, and I think this would look better if it curves down more and follows the wheel a bit better. But like I say, it's functional enough that I can get the car registered. So still to do is fit the little Chicago posts on the other side when they arrive, hopefully in the next day or two. Remake the bonnet. I don't have to remake the whole thing because the first one I did, which had these bottom panels too short. That means I've actually got plenty of room on the top panel here to shorten this. So effectively I cut this off and move all this up, and I can reuse those top panels and then just make new bottom panels. So I need to do that. I fitted the rear view mirror. I need to check the rules to see if I need rear reflectors. I may need reflectors back here, so I'll have to figure that one out. And the only other little job is I need to make something to hold the little plate that lets you get to the torque tube here. So this needs a little flat plate riveted to the front of it in here, and some sort of screw just on the back here. Usually there's sort of an arm with a little screw thing. I think it's a spring clip. So I need to make something for that. But other than that, I think it's pretty much ready. I will make a windscreen for it. Joss, when he came down, bought this with him, which was a second one off a piece that a friend of ours used on his Austin 7. So this was a spare. So this will form the center post for the screen. It's a bit tricky to get it balanced because I've got a seam right down the middle there. And it's probably a little high, so it'll end up being a little bit lower, but that gives you the basic idea. And it'll just be a sort of V screen, I guess. But I'll figure that out when I need it. You don't need a windscreen to get it registered. You will, of course, need goggles to drive the thing, though. So I think that's pretty good. I'll start doing the paperwork and talking to the people I need to talk to get it on the road.